So if you've been following my channel for a while, listening to some of my podcasts and vlogs, checking out my blog, it's no secret that I love fantasy-based dungeon crawling type adventures. I like this idea of having a character or a hero or a group of heroes, a party, going into the dungeon, confronting monsters, confronting a boss monster, leveling up, getting some loot. And certainly this is the aspect of Dungeons & Dragons and various role-playing games on me. But on the other side of that perspective, Wargamer Fritz, loving miniatures, can never have enough miniatures, loving that interaction of the dice with the miniatures and kind of setting up that narrative there. I also enjoy most of the board games that are dungeon crawlers. I focus on stuff like Gloomhaven, Standees, close enough, Zombicide Black Plague. We look at Massive Darkness, Dark Souls. Conan is kind of a skirmish game, but certainly mini-centric. But what about card games? What about something like Pathfinder the Adventure card game? What about something like the focus of this particular podcast and vlog, Lord of the Rings, the card game? I guess I should qualify that and say by Fantasy Flight Games, because there's a lot of other Lord of the Rings type games out there, specifically on the Fantasy Flight version, Lord of the Rings card game. And both of these experiences are very, very interesting because as a card game, certainly the dimension doesn't exist with the miniatures and the boards and the components, but I feel for the most part with card games, the designers can do a lot more. It's certainly much easier to print up cards or incorporate cards in various conditions than to print out a miniature or map tiles or cardboard tiles for each location. So with that aspect, it's almost like for a dungeon crawling experience or a narrative experience, card games, they have an advantage. And I enjoy both because from that card game perspective, it is invoking a little bit of that old school, where I started, how I started, advanced Dungeons & Dragons. It's all in your mind on there. So I find that perspective of playing the card games, revealing locations, fighting monsters, thinking about tactics, I can see it in my mind. So let's talk about Lord of the Rings. You're thinking about it. There's certainly a lot of stuff out there. It's been out for some time. But the eternal question, and this is especially important given the nature of the Lord of the Rings game being a living card game, an expanding card game, that is both a blessing and a curse, a boon and a bane, to borrow that term. Is this something that you will play? Is this something that will find a space on your gaming shelf? You know, I talk about my own collection just for kind of that narrative. I have three piles. I have kind of three groups of games. Most of the time, they're organized. That first pile are games that I'm playing every single month. I'm playing almost every week. They're actually by the side of my gaming table. They're in the man cave. I'm not going to put them up on my shelf because they're constantly in play, either with my board gaming group or playing solo myself. Then there's the second group, which the games are fantastic. TI, Twilight Imperium. Gloomhaven, Kingdom Death Monster. Legendary stuff that's on there, but they require a commitment to play. They require the stars, Arkham Horror, to align on there. Great stuff. I'd love to play them every week. But set up, players, solo investment on there, they don't hit play as much. And then the third grouping are games that are really good that I enjoy, like Space Hulk. But I play a lot of 40K. So most of the time I get that Warhammer itch satisfied, that grimdark through tabletop 40K. I don't need to play Space Hulk as much. That said, I need to play Space Hulk a lot more. Lord of the Rings, I feel like it's kind of in this second category. Things kind of need to align if you are playing it with a group, if it is a group type game. If you are playing solo, and I'd say about 80 to 90% of the time, this particular game, I play solo. It's just kind of how things work out. Solo, it's one of my favorite games to play, and we're going to explore that. So pile one, group one, pile two, group two. First, it's Lord of the Rings. Is this a good thing? Is this a bad thing? I'm going to commit a little bit of a heresy right now. I was not always a major Lord of the Rings fan, a major Lord of the Rings enthusiast on there. The movies kind of brought me in. I mean, I knew a little bit about the history. I knew some of the backstories and a little bit of the realm and stuff, but it was just kind of out there with it. The movies brought me into that. So it was a natural fit to move into Lord of the Rings. What I find the challenge here, is there anyone out there that really doesn't know much about Lord of the Rings? The narrative is great on the cards, the locations, the monsters, the characters, the items. They are all there. They are all very, very specific. Compare that to something like Talisman. It's a Fantasy Flight. Well, I should say Games Workshop now owns the IP. It's generic fantasy out there. This is like one of the appeals of Zombicide Black Plague. It's fantasy. It's generic enough. You can sit down, you can plug in, and you can play it. Lord of the Rings certainly is fantasy. I mean, an orc is an orc. A dragon is a dragon. You've got dwarfs running around with axes. But it requires a little bit more immersion. So that's something to possibly consider. Where the game really grows, and this is what I've been enjoying with it over time, is the fact that it pulls you even more into the narrative. I find myself watching the movies again and again, and not only seeing new aspects of character development and plot and all this, but kind of the geography, the background, where they go through both Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and stuff, exploring that on there. And as I read the background knowledge, and as I look at some of the maps, the game pulls you into that. So it's been a real treat in this duality of I can actually play the game and get that immersion online when I'm playing, and then kind of offline when I'm not playing, I can kind of immerse myself more. It's kind of complete in there. So that is really, really interesting compared to kind of, say, not that I don't like Terranoth, but kind of generic McFantasy that's out there. Mechanically being a card game. Now, this is really interesting because in theory, it sets up very, very fast. What we do, and certainly there's a lot of videos out there that will walk you through the mechanics. I'm kind of trying to answer this question, is this something you'd like to play? But at its core, you build a party of heroes. You select some gear and equipment. You get to activate that gear and equipment based on resources. And you have quests to complete. And there's different pieces, different parts of each quest. Random locations are dealt out. Various monsters and conditions are dealt out. So even if you played the quest before, there's enough moving pieces that it's going to be not only fresh every time and new, but require, in that moment, tactics. If you get wiped or if you need to reset, it's just a question of reshuffling your deck, reshuffling the encounter monster effect deck, and going at it again. The challenge, so the quests have the potential to play very fast. And some of them play fast. Some of them have a little bit more bite to them. They take a longer amount of time. So you can play it anywhere from 30 minutes to 45 minutes. A few of the longer ones, making decisions and figuring things out, maybe 50 minutes to an hour on there. That's probably a little bit slow, just with myself playing it. But where the game slows down, and this isn't in a bad way, this could be interesting or not, it's a deck building game, which means you have your heroes, and based on their conditions and what spheres of influence they can activate, you are pulling in cards because you start out with a hand of cards and you draw cards every single turn. Effects activate cards. These cards interact with your heroes. Could be effects, could be other adventures, could be equipment. So you're literally sitting there and looking at the adventure that you're going to undertake, and in your card resources, you're going to build your deck. It can kind of be a love and hate thing. It's interesting because that's a whole subset of the game, optimizing your deck, building killer decks that are just going to crush, but not really because the game is pretty challenging. We're going to keep that in mind on there. But at the same time, to quickly start, you have to build your deck first. Now, in theory, you could build a couple of decks and keep them rubber banded up and ready to go. But at its core, this is not a game you just sit down and crack open and play, either solo or with another player. You sit down, you pick your heroes, you think about the quest you want to run, and then it's kind of like I view it like you're at the camp or the inn and you're gearing up for that adventure. So it's interesting with that. Now, being a living card game, this is where if you are a completionist, it's going to drive you absolutely crazy. And I am a completionist, and I got a lot of Lord of the Rings card game stuff. I don't ever think I'll have all of it. I think that's an impossibility. Is there anyone online down there in the comments, or point me to a response on my blog or something like that? Is there anyone out there that has the complete collection of all the cards out there? Is there like a blog that someone has this, some sort of enthusiast? I mean, it's massive. So if you're a total completionist, this could kind of irk you a little bit. On the other side, I came into playing this game about 2 or 3 years ago, something like that. So maybe midway through or a little bit past midway through. You buy the core, and then you're just confronted by big expansions, smaller expansions, individual expansions. For each big expansion, there's sub-quests on there. You're just bombarded with this stuff, and you're like, where do I even start? So you have to navigate a little bit of that. But I find that and even now as I navigate the quests and the packs and the stuff I want to buy, it's really, really good. I'm glad that I got into it at this point, because everyone has a player personality. Everyone has the type of adventures, the type of parties they like to play. And with Fantasy Flight at this point, with what they've put out in terms of each kind of set and quests relates to some sort of geography or some sort of interaction in Middle-earth, you want to explore dwarven mines? You want to kind of go dungeon crawling? Do you want to fight like battles and stuff like that? Do you want intrigue type of quests, kind of cloak and dagger spy? There's a massive amount of diversity and a massive amount of quests where literally you can, not with any spoilers, just reading the back of the boxes, you can pick the type of quests that you are going to enjoy playing. So I find this, on the one hand, it seems a little overwhelming because there's so many cards and it's a living card game, and what are you going to do? But at the same time, you can say, hey, this is my priority. These are the lists that I really enjoy playing. These are the quests I want to go for, and start literally collecting those. And then over time, build up more, and more. So a lot of dynamic pieces above and beyond just playing. The challenge with being a two-player game versus a solo game, there's a little bit of Xenoshift in here. If you've played Xenoshift, it's a sci-fi card game that is just brutalized. You have to survive 9 waves. It's a base defense game. I love it. I love it on there. But it just brutalizes you. And it doesn't even try to hide it. It's just you're going to get absolutely brutalized by Xenos. And Lord of the Rings, even the easier quests are really, really hard. There is a lot of tension in there. Now, yes, you need an optimal deck. Yes, crafting a deck, if you build an iron type deck, that's really going to do well versus just, I always play themed decks and I get a lot of crushed on things. I like to run a lot of dwarves and play that stuff up, or try to visit aspects from the movies and stuff and the narrative and the books and all that. So you could play just crushing it like I'm a Magic the Gathering player, meta it out, or you could play it like a role-playing game. And certainly that'll have a swinging effect. But at its core, those adventures are hard. And this was the challenge I found with playing Xenoshift. You bring that to a pickup game, you bring that to your club to play, some people sit down, you've got an hour, hour and a half, 2 hours to play. They don't want to get crushed 3 or 4 times and just brutalized. They want to have a gaming experience. So with Lord of the Rings, it's a little bit of similar, and certainly the medium quests and the hard quests, even with an optimized deck, what they throw at you is insane. Now, the upside to this is with the cards, with the mythology, with everything in there, you really get immersed. You really get into the narrative. And as it develops, I find myself visualizing it and playing it. The first quest, and there's no spoilers necessarily in this. I won't really give away all the cards because I want you to discover them. The first question in the base game has you delivering a message through, of course, a spider and orc-infested forest. All right, simple enough. I'm going to send in some dwarves. They're going to have to do what they have to do. And the card combination was really interesting because I'm exploring on this path, and I draw like 3 or 4 different locations that I have to make it through first on there. So I find myself telling a story as I'm playing where I send in these 3 dwarves. They get off the path. They're lost in the forest. It's insane. Kind of like an orc lieutenant appears out of nowhere with a king spider. So, he's riding that king spider on there. And I'm getting crushed there. I'm trying to find my way out of these locations with these 3 dwarves. They can't on there. Would have been better off taking an elf or some sort of character that could navigate that. That's the game literally throwing the randomness and just crushing me. But even in that, you get kind of pulled in where you can see this narrative unfolding. That works really well solo, because worst case, I get crushed, I reset it, we're ready to go. Does that work with 2 players? Does that work if you bump it up to 4 players on there? Not always. Depends on, if they're not a diehard Lord of the Rings enthusiast, it's a little bit hard to say. It's been kind of a mixed bag with people that I play from that regard on there. So that's something to consider. The final thing to consider, and I do consider this a buy-in, a necessary buy-in, because it's a living card game and you're going to be adding cards and you're going to be expanding. At least it's not a WizKid blind buy pack type thing on there. You know what you're getting in the sets, so you can select that stuff. Card sleeves. Absolutely card sleeves. Now, I play Pathfinder the Adventure card game, which is a similar deck building game in there, card game, but the cards are just kind of randomized on there. Meaning you have your heroes, you kind of build an event deck and you play it out. Those cards get somewhat worn on there, but Lord of the Rings, you're doing a lot of shuffling. You're doing a lot of card draws on there, and your cards are getting kind of double action in that before you even play the quest, you're building this deck. So I look at the different spheres, I look at the different abilities of decks that I have. Reminds me of like baseball cards back in the day. And you're literally looking at cards, you're putting some cards. I've got cards that are auto-include in my deck, then I've got some other possibilities that I want to see. Maybe, depends, because you build your deck between 30 and 50 cards. So it's this really back and forth navigation of cards in there. The cards are going to get a lot of wear just that way, in addition to flipping over, in addition to drawing stuff over. So with the exception, I'm trying to think of what else is Zombicide Black Plague. I have 2 copies of Black Plague. One is like the home copy, and one is the gaming, I bring it to play copy. That's just totally brutalized. People playing, dropping the miniatures, stepping on them, stuff spilling on it. Those minis are painted, at least to a tabletop quality, so I don't feel as bad. That game is sleeved on there, and even that's getting beat up. So if it's a really high volume game, I will potentially sleeve my stuff, but most of my card games are not on there. But Lord of the Rings is for that kind of reason. So I personally, whether you sleeve or not, I think that is something to consider. You can get the more expensive sleeves, the less expensive sleeves, but in navigating this, I do consider that to be an auto include on there. Yes or no? For your gaming collection, for your shelf, for your plays. For me, it is definitely one of the top 10 games. And the reason why I say top 10 is there's a lot of really good games that I personally enjoy in my collection, but I find myself all the time coming back to this game. For the narrative, for the play, for the challenge, although I'm not too happy when I get beat down, even taking a competitive deck on there. But there's a lot of aspects to play, deck building, strategizing, and in that moment, the actual adventure.